Welcome to webinar number 8 from my online class, Working the Workbook, which is an e-course that supports the Course in Miracles workbook for students. It's a monthly webinar that I offer to everybody in the class, but to everybody else as well, because it's a beautiful opportunity for you to get a peek into what this class is about, and for us to all join and sit in truth together. But before you get too comfortable sitting, first, let's get up and dance. Win Paris has given me permission to use his music, and I am so excited to share a gorgeous song that he plays in kirtan all the time called Saraswati. So come on, join me, get up, let's dance. Wasn't that fun? Didn't that take you out of your head and just give you a taste of what it means to just be? You know, the webinars are interesting for me because for the most part, I really let go of any ideas about what I think I should be teaching and allow the Holy Spirit to move through me spontaneously. So this time, what seems to be coming up is just some basic review and beginning to get into more discussion of what special relationships are. Let's take a couple of moments to settle down and move into quiet. The memory of God is shimmering across the wide horizons of our minds. That comes from the introduction to part 2 of the workbook. Let's just allow the beauty of that statement, the greatness and the magnitude of the thought that the memory of God is shimmering across the wide horizons of our minds, to become felt and experienced right now. The introduction to A Course in Miracles text tells us that the aim of the Course is to remove the obstacles to the awareness of love's presence. It says it is not a course on love because love is something that cannot be taught, it just is, and anyway, as we remove the obstacles to the awareness of love's presence, we will become aware of love, which is always who we really are and what is actually occurring. It's not a happening or a doing, this love. This love is life. This love is being. And the Course says the same thing all the way through, in the text, in the workbook, in the manual. And we learn by repetition. We learn to unlearn the conditioning that we have instituted. We learn that we are the dreamer of a dream. We learn that the world is not real and bodies are not real. We learn that the ego is very cunning and deceptive and has built in several layers of veils and walls to block and hide and obscure the truth. And the truth is that we are still in the mind of God, where we have always been, and that we are not a body, we are free, because we are still as God created us. There's a section in chapter 21 called The Fear to Look Within. And what's going on for all of us is an intense fear, a fear that is so strong that some of us really aren't aware of how much resistance we truly have to the Course. And for others of us, we're painfully, acutely aware of how afraid we are and how much resistance we have to the Course. Or some mixture. And of course, sometimes we're so afraid that even though we're resistant to the Course, we're also open to the Course. At this point, having done about 200 lessons, depending where you're at, you must have some degree of willingness, and that's all Jesus says it takes to really accept and embrace what the Course has to offer. And beyond willingness, I want you all to know that grace is moving through you, or you couldn't be sitting here right now. You just wouldn't be interested. The way that the mind is healed is through faith. Faith that Jesus is telling us the truth when he says that we don't know anything. And faith that rather than feeling that this is a terrifying loss of control, that actually it's relaxing and liberating to learn that we don't know anything, and that the memory of God is shimmering across the vast horizons of our minds. But first, we have the fear to look within, because the ego has us wrapped around its little finger. The ego has us believing that if we look within, we are going to be devoured. We are going to see something terrible. We are going to be annihilated, murdered, killed, punished, tortured. Something terrible, something unspeakable, something unbearable. And it's essential that we realize that we have brainwashed ourselves into believing this lie, that there is something to fear, and that there's something about us that is horrifying and repulsive. We have to know that, and that's a hard thing to know. Yet Jesus is gently urging us over and over again to take a look at what you believe, how you think, so that we can see that, yes, it's revolting, it's awful, but it's also funny because none of it is true. And that is extremely difficult to accept because we identify with the body and because we hold other people dear to us, and we hold other things, possessions, the planet dear to us. And we hold ideas dear to us, such as health and human love. The idea of not holding these things dear is blasphemous to ego thinking. It would be a life of depraved indifference if we didn't cherish our human relationships and the planet. And yet, Jesus tells us, learn now without despair. There is no hope of answer in the world. Learn now without despair. There is no hope of answer in the world. That's from chapter 31. There is nothing in this world that can answer our pain and fear and sorrow and outrage and sense of guilt and shame. Nothing. And that is not to be despaired over. That is to be quietly welcomed with a click of recognition that it's true. There's no need to rejoice or be jubilant. Just accept what is so. And so Jesus teaches us about specialness and special relationships in the Course, about halfway into the text, and similarly about halfway into the workbook, we're introduced to the idea of special relationships, although that term is never actually used in the workbook, but it becomes clear that that's what's being spoken of. Special relationships are anything and everything that takes the place of God. God is unified love, unified loving light. Special relationships take place between bodies. For the most part, we're going to talk about special relationships with other people, and we can have special love relationships and special hate relationships. And any kind of special relationship is actually mimicking the original special relationship that the ego tried to have with God. So when we had the tiny mad idea that we could separate from God's mind, and we stepped away from unification and became conscious of something other than God, then we wanted God to notice us and acknowledge that we existed now separately from him. And he did not do that because this was just an imaginary game going on in the mind. It wasn't something that actually happened. So there was nothing for God to acknowledge. And just feel into the tremendous absurdity of the idea that separation could exist within unity. Unity is unified. And unified oneness is all the same. So there can be no separation or distinction or uniqueness coming out of unity. Unity cannot produce separation and uniqueness, specialness. Just cannot be. Then the ego mind was insulted and offended and disappointed and frightened. Because if God didn't acknowledge its existence, maybe it didn't really exist. And that's the truth. The self-concept that the ego has made up is not real. But because the mind believes in this self-concept, it seems very real. The power of belief is real. And that's why the Course talks about the power of decision, because we can decide to believe in what God offers us. And when we do that, the ego belief in separation evaporates. Anyhow, the first special relationship was unrequited love when the ego wanted God to notice it, and God did not, because the ego was a dreaming mind coming up with an imaginary story that God is unaware of. And so the ego was left on its own. And the ego is very emotional and irrational. So it believed many things in a tumble into insanity. Let's say that God's unified, loving mind, which is full of light, peace, and joy, is a sane mind. And Jesus tells us in the Course, the only illness is mental illness. So God's mind is mental health. Well, the ego went crazy. Ego is the Latin word for I, myself. This desire to be I, myself, was a harmless desire. The belief in the desire played out in a turmoil of sin, guilt, and fear. The ego believed that it was separate and that that was a crime to be punished, so we call that sin. And it felt guilty of committing a crime, and notice that the ego was the judge and jury of this quote-unquote crime, because God wouldn't consider separation a crime. If he's a loving God, love is absolute. If he did acknowledge the ego, which he cannot because the ego is not real, only love is real. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. That's another quote from the introduction to the text. So if God did know we were here, he certainly wouldn't be judgmental or punitive about it. It's no skin off God's nose. However, for some reason, the ego decided to become terrified. So it convicted itself of the crime of separation. It felt guilty that it had done something terrible to God, and then it became afraid that God would do something terrible in return. And this is the deep state of mind that informs everything that we feel and believe in this life that we believe that we're living. So we tumbled down the ladder from heaven to hell, from God's mind to a material world. And in doing that tumble, the ego came up with time and space versus eternity and infinity. And it also came up with a material world, celestial bodies, the cosmos, the universe, and people, human bodies. The Course says that the human body is the quote-unquote hero of the ego's dream. The hero of the dream, the body, really makes it seem like we're separate people. It really seems as if there's a you and a me. This is the splitting process that the ego uses so that God will never find us, and so that we can blame others rather than taking responsibility ourselves, and most of all so that we can remain mindless, because by the time we find ourselves in space and time, in a world, and then in a body, we have completely forgotten that we came from abstract divinity, that we came from God's mind. And this is how the ego seemingly secures its existence and identity in separate selves with names and social security numbers. The workbook, little by little, helps us see the meaninglessness of what we're seeing out there, what we're seeing on the three-dimensional screen of the world, which appears so real to us, what we're seeing when we look in the mirror and see a face. Little by little, Jesus drives home the point that what we see is not there, what we think is not thought, what we believe is not true, what we're telling ourselves is false, and that we are constructing a seeming world through image making, projecting everything that's scary to us outward. And some of it looks beautiful so that we value it. But the fact is, pain and pleasure both prove that there's a body. And special relationships prove that there is a me and a you. There is another. And what he does is different than what I do. He's guilty. I'm not guilty. Or sometimes it's the reverse. Sometimes I feel guilty and think he's not guilty. I don't realize that we're the same one, that we're one dreaming mind, and that we've actually consciously chosen to dream. And the whole first part of the workbook, up to lesson 220, is about undoing our belief in the separate self, in the ego, God. The ego has made up a God, and that's the God of the Bible. That is the mercurial, punishing, occasionally loving God that we have post-traumatic stress in relationship to, because he's unpredictable, and there's nothing tougher on a human being than unpredictability. It results in the Stockholm Syndrome. If you remember Patty Hearst, she had a case of the Stockholm Syndrome in that she bonded with the people who kidnapped her and betrayed her. We have to bond with people who betray us because they're unpredictable and dangerous. And so the only way to feel safe is to join them somehow. And that's what we've done with the ego God. We try to join him. Or the other thing that egos do is rebel. And in lesser forms, we all do this with our parents. We either mimic our parents' behavior or we rebel against our parents' behavior. And special relationships are very much in action between parents and children because it's a setup. To be a parent is to be a failure, or it's to be put on a pedestal and adored by children who are in denial about their whole range of feelings. No matter who we love, adore, and cherish as a human, we also have mixed feelings about that person. We've also been disappointed by them. We've also felt like we can't live up to what they want of us, or we'll never be as good as them. All the variations in relationships are there to keep us distracted so that we don't realize that there is nobody else out there, and that we ourselves are not living beings either. As Ken Wapnick always says, the puppeteer is the one making the decisions and pulling the strings. We are literally puppets. The body is a neutral thing which can be used for any purpose, and ultimately for no purpose, as we realize that there is no body. John Mundy has a funny expression, "I'm nobody, who are you?" Now, when we first learn that we're nobody, we can be terribly upset, disoriented, angry, fearful. We can sneer and laugh and think it's impossible. There's many, many reactions the ego can have. And when you're a course student and you're really enjoying the course, you find out that you can still have all those reactions, except now you have some loving detachment and you're looking at the ego reactions with Jesus or the Holy Spirit, same thing, and starting to laugh a little bit. And so there's almost this simultaneous experience of being reactive and then stepping back and noticing what the reaction is and feeling a little happy tickle of amusement. And that's what we've been doing in the workbook practice. And certainly you can do this when you're reading the text too. You can apply the text at any given moment. There's the peace of God right there. As we cultivate a relationship with the Holy Spirit, we learn that a holy relationship is our connection to the Holy Spirit. A holy relationship has nothing to do with another person. We don't decide with a friend or a lover, let's have a holy relationship. What we decide is, I am going to remember who I really am by choosing a different teacher, the Holy Spirit rather than the ego, and allowing myself to be used, to let the body be used for a different purpose, a loving, healing purpose of forgiveness, and being a conduit for miracles. Ken Wapnick says that the ego takes us from God's mind into the world and into the body, and the miracle takes us from the world and the body back to God's mind. That's the healing of the miracle. When the Course tells us that there's no order of difficulty in miracles, it's because miracles are love. They are a symbol of God's love. And love is the same. That might feel impossible right now for you if you think, well, I can't love everybody in the same way that I love my husband or my wife or my mother or my father or my children or my pets. I can't love everybody that way. That's a very special love. Actually, love is a condition. Love is a state of mind that we enter into when we decide to align with the Holy Spirit. And yes, there are relationships in your life that will be in proximity to you, that you're just going to be around certain people more than others. And you can enter into the state of love with anybody. Might feel disloyal at first to think, you mean I could love the mailman as much as I could love my child? Yes. Because we are all one unified love. But you see, the Stockholm Syndrome, the betrayal bond that the ego offers us, tells us, oh, that is just so disloyal. How distasteful to love anybody and everybody the same degree that you would love your treasured family. The Course tells us there are no strangers, and everyone is our family. And there's plenty of people that we don't want to be family with. We don't want to hang around with them. We don't approve of how they're behaving, what they think. But that doesn't matter when you embrace the Course, because your personality and their personality and all the, terrible ways of thinking that people have in the world, none of that matters when we're overlooking the body and seeing beyond the body. The best way to overcome bigotry, racism, sexism, ageism, prejudice, hate-mongering, all of it, is to recognize who you already are. Because in that recognition comes a power and a strength that heals the world. It heals all the troubled minds, hating minds, attacking, blaming minds, fault-finding minds. This alignment with the Holy Spirit, the conviction that we are all one, the fearlessness that comes with disidentifying with the body and realizing that we are mind, is supremely healing to you and to everybody else. Because you're seeing the essence of them as they really are, which heals them because you're loving them. And you're freeing them from who they thought they were and the guilt that they're living with. And in so doing, you're freeing yourself. Part 2 of the workbook, the acquisition of true perception, will really start to bring that home. And it may seem abstract to remove the obstacles to the awareness of love's presence, or the idea of looking at the ego thought system. But all Jesus is really asking us to do is look at our beliefs and admit to ourselves that we're not victims and we're not selfless. We have a personal agenda and we're trying to fulfill it. For instance, women always want to blame men for running or being afraid to be in a relationship. But the underside of that is that the woman has a need and a desire to be in a relationship with that particular person who is not matching her need and desire. Because unconditional love would say, whatever he needs to do, whatever's best for him. And who are we to say that being in that particular relationship is best for him? And ethnic groups always think that it's very, very important to maintain their group, and that the culture shouldn't be lost, and the customs and ways of the elders shouldn't be lost. but why not? And of course, environmentalists feel that it's extremely important to help maintain certain species. We shouldn't let certain species die out. But why? And of course, they'll claim very unselfishly that it's because we have to maintain the ecology of the planet. But how do they know that we'll maintain the ecology of the planet? So it looks sometimes like political activists and social activists are the good guys. But then how often are they making the other side the bad guys? So there are so many personal agendas that we take for granted as being good causes. But a good cause is nothing more than personal interest parading as the highest good of all. And the highest good of all is recognizing what we really are. There are no species. There are no animals. There are no cultures. There are no ethnicities. This is a big play of consciousness here. This is a dreaming mind, chaotic, irrational, filled with contradictions, paradoxes. It's a world of duality, this or that, yes and no, right and wrong, good and bad. And so we have to start busting ourselves and taking a look without judgment, without self-criticism, because that's the only way we're going to realize that we're not this puppet, we're not this face in the mirror, and that all the tragedies and struggles that we thought we were having are actually the ego's way of keeping us endlessly involved in a pretend world and a fake identity. And one more thing about special relationships. They're not limited to other people. We have special relationships with anything that comforts us, anything that we replace God with. So another word for that could be idols and magic. In other words, if I have a headache and I take my favorite form of painkiller, then I'm replacing God with an Advil. And there is nothing wrong with that. Right now, we have to respect and understand that we don't think that God is going to be enough to cure a headache. We need something concrete, like an aspirin, an ibuprofen. But now we can say, Holy Spirit, I'd like you to be with me while I take this Advil. And I'd actually like to use it as a symbol of God's love, instead of as a fear-based ego symbol of separation and proof that I'm a body. I'm no longer interested in proving that I'm a body. And that's the gentle way that we begin to climb back up to heaven. By becoming aware of eating chocolate because it's comforting, that it actually mimics love in the brain. But then turning to the Holy Spirit and saying, you know what, I know that I'm not a brain in a body, but I'm still eating chocolate. So could you help me use chocolate as a symbol of God's love? And we can do that with everything. Anything that we use to give us pleasure or kill pain. Just say, Holy Spirit, I notice that this is a habit of mine. And I no longer am interested in perpetuating ego habits that never really comfort me and never really satisfy me. So come with me and help me see through your vision and transform this into a symbol of God's love. And that is not dragging God down into the dream, which Jesus clearly tells us not to do. We would be dragging God into the dream if we said, Holy Spirit, please make this guy love me. Please help me pay my debts. If we try to improve the storyline of our dream, that's dragging God into the dream. That's praying to get instead of praying to recognize what you already are. Let's look at a question that a student sent in. She wrote, I'm becoming a little interested in past life regression. However, mentally, I'm trying to grasp the time concept of A Course in Miracles. So my question is, how will I know when I'm ready to learn about time? Well, the ego is the one who taught us about time. So we've already learned about time and we believe in time. The Course has a section in the Manual for Teachers, Is Reincarnation So? And it says, if reincarnation is a concept that serves you in your awakening process, then use it. But since the world never existed and bodies aren't real, ultimately reincarnation cannot be so. Another way of thinking about reincarnation is dreams within dreams within dreams. I personally found it helpful to believe in reincarnation for a while. I came from a background where reincarnation was ridiculous, something to be scoffed at. And through my own experiences with people who had had reincarnational experiences, I became open to the possibility, but I still didn't believe. Until when I was a client in therapy, I started to have past life memories come up. And I started to remember things like being in New York City in the 1800s and knowing exactly what I was wearing and what was happening at the time, and that I was not Amy and I didn't look like this, but I could sense and sort of see who I was. And also I had in utero memories, which just blew me away because I didn't believe anything like that could happen to me, and remembering parts of my own birth process. And I worked with many people who had past life memories. The thing is not to make them important. They're just ways of awakening when they're used well. So time can be used for the Holy Spirit's purpose. And the time to do that is now. At any given moment, we can use time for the Holy Spirit's purpose and experience the holy instant, which is a step outside of time, back into timelessness. And feel the quiet and the beauty and the joy of that. I just felt it right now. And you can hear that my voice changes. These are the things I want you to notice for yourself. Notice if something in you settles down. Notice if your heart lifts. Notice if your breath comes easier. If your voice gets gentler. Notice these things and bookmark that that's the Holy Spirit moving through you. Remember, the Holy Spirit is in your smile. A smile is a spontaneous, genuine thing. And it's an immaterial thing. It's not your teeth, it's not your lips. It's something else. That's the Holy Spirit in you. And that's only one telltale sign of the Holy Spirit. Let's read a little about the Holy Instant in chapter 15, which is called the Holy Instant. There's a section called The Holy Instant and the Attraction of God. It's section 9 in chapter 15, and it begins like this. As the ego would limit your perception of your brothers to the body, so would the Holy Spirit release your vision and let you see the great rays shining from them, from your brothers, so unlimited that they reach to God. It is this shift to vision that is accomplished in the holy instant. Now I'm looking at you right now, and I see the great rays shining with love and gorgeousness and purity. And this seeing is not eyesight, and it's not a visual image. For me, there's almost a spreading of wings through the heart chakra, through the chest, all the way along my arms and out my hands. And somehow it's as if I am within the cosmic heart. And it's something that happens very naturally and effortlessly. And even though I say it's my heart chakra, my arms, my hands, there's an intangible, indescribable quality to my experience that is bodiless. And I describe it to you in some detail to help you get the hang of what the Holy Spirit can feel like, as opposed to the constricting restrictions and limitations and tensions and graspings and clutchings of the ego. There's a melting to the Holy Spirit, an expansion, a fluidity, a openness, a freedom beyond a word like freedom. And this is the present memory that the Course talks about in connection with the Holy Spirit, that the only memory that could possibly be aligned with truth is the eternal present. And there is no past in the eternal present. There is no memory but what is now. And what is now is a joined union of what is. There is no longer a consciousness between what is and what is observing what is. The Course is for awakening and going all the way. I didn't know this when I started the Course. I just knew that I needed help. And I knew that my mind was open and my heart was open. I didn't care about forgiveness or special relationships or gratitude, except in a very personal way. And I didn't understand the Course in many ways, although I thought I did. And none of that mattered, because the first time I did the workbook, at the end of that year, I kept seeing Jesus holding me upside down by the ankles, a naked infant. That was me. And the word reborn never came to mind. I just felt dewy. And like a clean slate. And grace was pouring through me because my life just started to flow. And I didn't feel nearly as concerned about what I should do. I felt this great allowing of what seemed right to do next. And that was to go to psychotherapy school and be trained as a Gestalt therapist and have this conversation with other people who were desperate to have this conversation too. And I did that for many years and did a lot of pain processing, a lot of part one of the workbook in my life before I even knew about the course, a lot of looking at the ego and allowing what I saw to just go out with the garbage. Just unnecessary. Not needed anymore. My judgments, my interpretations, my expectations, my super sense of responsibility, which was just me playing ego God and thinking that that was love and consideration. Little by little, I took that out. Worked with a psychotherapist, had a witness in him, an unconditionally loving witness who just allowed me to blossom from a person who didn't have a sense of self into a human building a sense of self, until I reached a point where I felt pretty fully like myself, and then I was able to lose interest in myself, at which point my work changed from helping other people do pain processing, which is what I call undoing the ego, and then I started to really dedicate myself more fully to spiritual counseling and opening the mind to the God self. And having that recognition just move through us, me and the client, me and whoever was in front of me, to feel the love in that moment fully with anybody and everybody. And the peace and the right-minded sense of certainty that this is life. This is reality. So, the time to learn about time is now, and the learning is an unlearning. Welcome the holy instant, and practice moments of stillness and timelessness by simply asking the Holy Spirit to show you what a quiet mind is, what timeless love is. And boom, here it is. Okay. See you next month. Namaste.